Hello, my name is Carrie Jones, and my concentration is exercise science. The topic of my paper is the analysis of sports injuries in the human body and the nature of the sport. So it's kind of like a comparison of the kinds of injuries that you get from different sports, and if it's a failure of the human body or if it is a problem with the nature of the sport. Okay. Americans have enjoyed many pastimes, but probably none more than sports. Whether it's a Sunday afternoon full of football or a Saturday morning with the kids at soccer games, sports speak to this generation. More and more people are beginning to play sports, especially women, and with that, there are more sports-related injuries. Why is it that when the human body trains and competes that it sometimes breaks? Is it that the body is susceptible to a particular injury, or is it simply the nature of the sport? Research shows that there's a difference between different sports, not only in the types of injuries, but in the frequency. Running. Running is somewhat of a new phenomenon that has motivated this country to be a little bit more active. Seems like every week there's a new 5K in town and people really enjoy them. If there are a lot of people running and participating in these races, are there many people getting injured? A study done by the South African Journal of Sports Medicine shows that 90% of study participants received injuries. There was a population of 200 recreational half-marathon runners, and they were observed for 12 months, of which they participated in half marathons. The most common injury received by 26% of the half-marathon runners was over the 12 months were knee injuries. Then 22% received tibia and fibula injuries, and 16% had lower back and hip problems. Distance running is an endurance sport that involves the human body making many repetitive movements that apply force to the lower levers of the body. The knees and ankles of a distance runner would have to bear the brunt of the rest of the body along with the force applied by the body onto the ground. Running half marathons does not require you to physically touch other individuals. It's a non-contact sport. Therefore, initially, it will be concluded that injuries do not occur because of the nature of the sport. However, the fact that it does require you to keep your body in constant motion through the work of the hips, knees, and ankles would make it very much so physical. To conclude, distance running injuries occur to participants because of the nature of the sport. National Basketball Association, or NBA. The National Basketball Association has many athletes they can call their own. They practice almost all year and compete April to June every year. These athletes are professional, fine-tuned machines that play basketball for a living. With the high number of athletes participating and the high volume of activity, there comes a high number of injuries. The most common injury in the NBA is an ankle sprain, so much so that many of the players constantly wear ankle braces. Patellofemoral inflammation, which is a swelling and tenderness right at the spot where your knee begins and your femur ends, is not as common an injury, but the most serious relating to an athlete's career in the NBA. Basketball requires the human body to move in a jagged back and forth motion, kind of like moving side to side and moving your feet very quickly at the same time. You have to have the muscle to bounce back really quickly, and you have to have the flexibility to be able to put that kind of strain on your body and it not break. The human body, if prepared through training, can compensate for the movements that basketball requires it to make. The human body is not going to become injured in the game of basketball just because it's susceptible to quick, jagged movements. Basketball was not originally a contact sport. Over the years, this has changed, and if you watch a game today, the players will bump, fall, and jump on each other trying to get the ball in that hoop. An article from the Orthopedic Journal of Sports Medicine that aimed to explore the injuries of NBA players over the years said that, quote, professional athletes are subject to various injuries that are often dictated by the nature of their sport. Professional basketball players previously have been shown to sustain injuries throughout the musculoskeletal system, most commonly to the ankle and the knee." End quote. The physical aspect of the game of basketball leads to the number of injuries it produces. The physical and hard contact nature of the sport causes the most common injuries in the National Basketball Association. American football. It seems like there are more horror stories about football injuries than any other sport. It's one of the most popular sports in America, one of the reasons being because it's truly an American sport. From the backyard pickup games to the professional stadiums that hold thousands and thousands, football is America. Football is also one of the most physically played games. What are the implications of a sport like this? Football accounts for 12 times the injuries to athletes than other sports. The most common injury in football is a concussion, but players are also likely to get injured all over their body. Stop Sports Injuries Now says that protection padding will not prevent an injury to the body. The human body can do almost anything that it's trained to do. It's made to perform and complete tasks. When the body is put into a situation where its task is to hit or be hit by another body, things start to fail. Bones break, skulls rattle, and injuries occur. There are many things about football that the human body can handle just fine. Things like running, kicking, throwing, and catching. The problem is when the bodies are forced together, sometimes being thrown to the ground over and over again. The body cannot take that kind of strain, and it's susceptible to that amount of roughness. Football can be a fast-paced, bone-crushing game. In order to prepare for a game time, athletes have to practice just as hard and most likely more often. Quote, "Injuries occur during football games and practices due to the combination of high speeds and full contact." End quote. The very idea for some of the positions in the game of football is to prevent the athletes of the other team from crossing a line by almost any means necessary. Injuries in football are caused because the human body cannot handle the nature of the sport. In the case of football, both the nature of the sport and the susceptibility of the human body are to blame for the high rate of injuries in the game of football. Soccer. Soccer is the most popular sport in the world. There is something about kicking around a small ball that has many multicultural generations hooked. Even in a small community, people come together to play soccer, adults and children. When you think of soccer, you do not initially think of injury. But with all the people that participate in this sport, there has to be some injuries. A study done by the British Journal of Sports Medicine followed 23 teams over 7 seasons to account for the number of, the type of, and the patterns of the injuries in the league. They found that a thigh strain was the most common injury with 17% of all participants. Re-injuries accounted for 12% of all injuries, and they caused a longer absence from training and competition. One of the most interesting bits of data from this study was that on average, a player will get 2 injuries per season. Therefore, a team of, say, 30 players would expect to deal with 60 injuries during that season. Soccer can be a physical contact sport, but it's on a different level than football or basketball. In general, there's more room to move freely on a big soccer field than a small basketball court. However, the human body will generally stay in constant motion, ready for the ball if it comes that way, or running around with the ball. The human body only becomes susceptible when another player is in the picture or if the ball is kicked incorrectly. If the athlete kicks the ground instead of the ball, it could cause a massive quadricep or thigh tear or strain, along with other injuries to the ankle area and muscles around the shin. Some injuries in soccer are caused by the susceptibility of the human body. The nature of soccer includes a lot of running, dribbling the ball, and scoring. Players are not supposed to run into each other much, but they do. When this happens, there's almost always a penalty called. Because of how strictly most matches are officiated, the nature of soccer is not responsible for most injuries related to the game. Athletes do get injured because of other athletes, but it's not within the nature of the sport to run into or flip onto other athletes during a game of soccer. Baseball and softball. Almost every American has played or been to a baseball, softball, or t-ball game. There's something about swinging a bat at a ball that is exhilarating. Baseball and softball are not considered a contact sport, although some contact does occur. For the most part, you are not pushing other players out of the way. There is some running, but not nearly as much as soccer or distance running, but enough to need to condition your body. With the exception of the catcher, there are not many pads needed, and when you're up to bat, your head is protected by a helmet. With a sport like this, you would not generally think that athletes get injuries. Injuries in a baseball and softball show up mostly in pitchers. In an article from the Journal of Athletic Training, there is a study done in high school baseball and softball players that concluded that 37.3% of high school pitchers experience minor injuries to the upper extremity. 15.3% of field players also had minor injuries to the upper extremity. But in both cases, the injuries occurred toward the beginning of the season. Quote, "The injury rates were highest in the first month of the season, so prevention strategies should be focused on minimizing injuries and monitoring players early in the season." End quote. In a baseball game, players are expected to be able to throw a ball at a specific target that may sometimes be far away. They have to be able to hit the ball by swinging a bat quickly, accurately, and with power. This requires a lot of upper body strength that can be attained by training. The body can get stronger and accomplish the tasks necessary to play baseball and softball, but it is susceptible to injury when training requires it to pitch many times or swing many times. The body begins to work against itself, and minor injuries will occur. The nature of the sport is not a physical one, filled with contact. Injuries can occur when there is contact or even when a player twists wrong while sliding into a base, but it is not in the nature of the sport to cause injuries. There are many physical reasons that an athlete might get hurt. The sport cannot always be blamed. As Americans enjoy the many sports available today, keep in mind that there are ways to avoid injury. Know that there are some things that the human body cannot handle. There are sports that are responsible for inflicting injuries because it is in their nature to do so. However, sometimes it's the human body that fails and leads to injury, and sometimes both are at fault. Sports and physical activity are two of the most needed remedies in the United States today. We need to get out there and be active in sports and physical activity, but it needs to be done in a safe way. Thank you.